Is that okay for everybody?
Yeah.
So the book I held up there is Sarah Bridle's book, and it's one of a series of 5 under the subtitle Without the Hot Air. So there's 5 books on different aspects of sustainability. They're published by, I can't remember where, one of the universities. It'll come maybe later, maybe I've got it somewhere else in my notes. Backed by academic research, but it's very readable. So she goes through a day of food and looks at each of the elements in a kind of typical meal. And you can read the chapter without reading all the footnotes. The footnotes give you all the research that she's done to come to that conclusion. So it makes it an easy read, and you can then choose and go on to read the footnotes if you wish. The other source of graphics that we're using is the BBC Climate Change Food Calculator. I'll give you a link for that at the end. That was interesting to do as well, and you can do that yourself. It allows you to choose a food, and it shows you the impact that food has on the climate. And also thanks to St George's Church, Leeds, where we got some resources from as well. This pie chart shows us all the personal emissions in our normal kind of lifestyle. Somebody's decided this is our normal lifestyle anyway. And the one we're looking at is food and drink, the orange one, which they suggest is 25% of all our personal greenhouse gas emissions. So it's quite significant. For anyone that can't read the small print, it compares it against household energy, car use, financial services and other services, flying, public services, shopping, public transport, and a section called other. So the understanding is that if that's 25% of everything, then it's an area that we can have quite a big impact on if we choose to. This is the book that we read. She says, change your diet, the easiest way to help save the planet. Well, maybe, maybe not. I mean, food is a very personal thing. And I suppose what she's suggesting is that it's something that most of us have control over. So it's something we can choose to change if we wish to. On the other hand, it's so personal that we probably don't want anybody telling us what we should and shouldn't be eating. So I think it's not, I think there's definitely a question mark there. She breaks down she looks at breakfast, lunch, snacks and dinner, and she even looks at a lunchtime sandwich, bread, spread, margarine or butter, cheese layer or ham or whatever you have. And she looks at the environmental impact of each of the different elements. And she's gone into it in great detail. So she looks at production, land use, transport, packaging, cooking to get your final product. And it lets us see where the emissions are highest and where we can then make the most significant changes if we choose to. Gives us the information that we need. But as I said, I think changing what we eat is also a psychological challenge, as well as just a choice. I hope by the end of the evening we'll all be better informed, and that we'll have some top tips of things we can do or change to make climate positive changes in our food. This pie chart here, contribution of various foodstuffs to the greenhouse gas emissions for an average UK diet. So this is breaking down the 25% overall for food into different types of food. And the most significant one there is beef and lamb, which takes up 23% of our greenhouse gas emissions. This is assuming that we eat some beef and lamb. The second biggest one there is milk products at 20%, then pork and chicken at 13%, cereals 11%, and everything else, which is quite a lot of other things, 33%. So you can see there'll be no surprises coming up, because these are the things that she's going to look at, or that we're going to look at, that are the most significant things that we could change. Obviously, it depends on where our meat comes from. This is UK, and it would be different if it were worldwide, I suppose, or US. And it matters where the beef is grown, or the lamb is, the sheep are grazing, whether it's intensive or whether it's on land that couldn't be used for anything else. All these things are different aspects, different ways of looking at it. So our choices also have an impact on the farmers. So it's not easy. None of the choices are easy. None of our decisions are easy, are they? So we thought we would look at eating our way out of climate change in 3 different sections. So this is 1 cup at a time, and then Elisa's going to look at 1 plate at a time and 1 shopping basket at a time. So let's start with drinks. If I can still find my notes. So this slide shows you how the BBC Climate Change Food Calculator works. You select your food. Well, we're looking at drinks. So I selected drinks. So I selected tea. And then it takes you to this screen. You choose how many times a day you have this item. So I put in twice a day. 1 cup per serving, which is not right for me. I would have at least 2, if not 3. And then it compares it with your consumption of tea over a whole year, and it compares it with how far that would be equate to driving a petrol car or heating your home. And that's the style. I find those comparisons quite hard to grasp. David liked them, so I don't know whether it's just the way my brain works. I preferred this next bit, that it takes the same climate change food calculator takes you into. I prefer the next bit. Oops, my slide doesn't want to move on. I am using the arrow. Right, let's just pause for a minute. Oh, there we go. I preferred this slide, which compared different drinks and the kilos of greenhouse gases that they emit per serving.
The coffee's a bit bad.
Yeah, so you can then compare, okay, if I had the choice between tea and coffee and it didn't make any difference to me, if I'm thinking about climate change and emissions, you can drink loads of cups of tea for 1 cup of coffee comparatively. And I found that really quite interesting. I didn't know that. The beer and the wine is more to do with the production of it. There's a lot more water used to grow whatever it is that you put in beer. And also you tend to drink it in, well, I can't really say this, but in general, people would tend to drink a larger quantity of beer than wine. And therefore it would produce more emissions. I actually found I'd learned quite a lot by the end of reading the book, and not all the things I learned were what I expected to learn. So that was interesting. It's always good to be challenged. At the end, on the final slide, I've got some links, and one was a BBC Horizon film. I don't know if anybody else saw it, which Elisa pointed out to me, sent me. And it's a kind of light-hearted approach. It's, what's his name, Greg Wallace, with a bundle of celebrities, none of whom I had heard of course, who are at a meal, and they have to make their choices from their starter, the main course, and the pudding. And he then has a scientist, and he analyses their choices, and they see which of them wins on the basis of eating their food choices, emitting the least damaging greenhouse gases. Quite entertaining, but also quite instructive. And his thing about the wine was that even if the wine comes from South Africa or Australia, the wine tends to be shipped in massive, great shipping containers in a great big polythene bag inside, and would be bottled in Britain often. So you're not really paying the transport costs that you would imagine of all the bottles of wine. So Greg Wallace said, or so the scientist lady said. Okay, here's the coffee. So we know the tea is less damaging as a whole, basically because coffee needs a lot more fertilizers to grow a good crop, and also needs more processing, needs more energy for processing compared with tea. Now we're looking at black coffee, which they're suggesting would give you 21 grams of carbon CO2 equivalent emissions, as opposed to white coffee, which is twice as high. Cappuccino and latte just go off the scale. So the relevant, could you lift that? The relevant comment at the bottom, that I can't quite read, is because, of course, milk is by far the largest source of emissions in your tea or coffee because of the cows and the methane. And that is actually quite a thought, to realise the difference. We knew that, but the difference is really quite surprising. So assuming we're not prepared to give up our milk in our tea and coffee, what else can we do? No, I see what it is. If David clicks the wrong place, then I can't click. We do have now a lot of choices of different milk, and it's rare that you can go into a shop that doesn't have a choice of milks now, or a coffee shop that wouldn't offer you alternative milks. And this, I think, was the biggest surprise to me in all the reading that I did. I'd always assumed, because rice and soya and almonds certainly all come from far away, so their carbon footprint was bound to be massively bigger than dairy milk, which is produced much more locally, but that is not the case. All the alternative milks are by far less damaging because they don't come from animals, basically. And that was a huge surprise to me. And interesting enough, Sarah Bridle also comments that the campaign for the use of reusable cups and takeaway coffees is not nearly as significant as what you put into the cup, reusable or takeaway. Much more significant whether you're having tea, coffee, black, white, what kind of milk you're putting in. That's much more significant. So adding milk, she says, adding milk to your tea or coffee causes more emissions than either boiling the water for it or the producing of the tea or coffee in the first place. So I thought that was quite interesting. And I know we get our milk delivered by McQueen's on the doorstep in glass bottles, and they also do oat milk. The one they sell is called Oto, which is produced in the northwest of England. So it's British, at least. The oat milk that's most common in the supermarkets is Oatly, which is produced in Sweden. Not too far away. Oh, I think that's my little bit of presentation over. So that was basically an overview, an introduction, and a look at drinks, well, a limited number of drinks. So we're going to go into little groups now to think about these three questions. What influences you most in your tea, coffee, or milk choices? Is it whether or not it's fair trade, how much it costs, what its carbon footprint is, or the packaging? Would you consider any different choices? And have you ever tried any non-dairy milks? What's your experience with that? I'm going to ask David to put us into groups and also to put the questions into the chat. So Elisa, would you like to go first then? Okay.
Well, within the group, we had a range of milk choices, diverging between semi-skimmed, oat milk, fully skimmed milk and Channel Islands full cream milk. Most people had, half the group had tried oat milk and quite liked it. It works quite well in coffee, it does not work at all in tea. And the choice of tea and coffee is typically fair trade, with the issues around plastic in the tea bags, making a choice between loose tea and but there are some tea bag companies now solving that problem. I think that covered most of what we said. I don't know if anybody else in the group wants to add anything, but that was, we didn't think we'd make much change. Possibly drink more tea than coffee going forward. That might be something that we could do, make that choice.
Okay, thank you. Louise, do you want to give us anything that was different?
Very similar. We like the idea of your auto if it comes from locally, more local than Sweden. But taste still kind of wins out. And we were surprised by the results, but we had a good discussion.
Good. And Jack?
Yeah, well, most of our group hardly had any, either none or very little milk in teas and coffees, so they tended to go for the fair trade teas and coffees.
Yeah.
But I think most people had tried some of the different milks. Not particularly keen at most, but the oat one seemed to win out if there was an alternative. That seemed to be the alternative.
Grand, thank you. Francine, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, just to say that, just to give a wee shout out for Clipper, who do their tea bags are fully, there's no plastic in them at all.
Yeah.
And they're fair trade and organic, and that's just their standard tea bag ones. So that's one to look out for. It's not that easy to get them, but somebody, I don't know if you're interested, Angela, but somebody in Melrose is a kind of, not a trader for Suma, but people give her orders for Suma products, and which is a cooperative, and they sell Suma and other brands, and sort of once a month or so you can order stuff through her if you like.
We have somebody similar to that called Myra on the screen.
Myra.
But it's not so much fair trade, it's tradecraft orders that she deals with. I don't know how far afield she's prepared to deliver them, however. It might be, if you're further afield than Selkirk, it might be better for you to have them ordered direct. Yeah. Okay, are you ready, Elisa?
As I will ever be.
As you will ever be. If you'd like to just let us know when you're ready for me to move on to the next screen, because obviously I've got the screen thing. So here we go with the second section.
Okay, so the second section, we're going to be thinking about one plate at a time, which becomes a little bit more complex because obviously you put a variety of things on a plate usually at one time, or you mix things together. So it gets kind of tricky, but can we have the next slide? Okay, this is one of the topics that Anne mentioned a little bit earlier on about the main protein that you would put onto your plate. And we have the difference there with the beef and the lamb right at the top because of the methane gas that the beef cattle produce, burping apparently. So that's a huge issue, although there is being some research done to try and change the feed to reduce that. But obviously it's a huge issue worldwide, particularly in the Western world, because of the amount of beef that is eaten. So lamb is a slightly better meat to choose, but still produces a lot of greenhouse gases. The next two sections down, the farmed prawns and the farmed fish, they hit high up because of the amount of processing that goes into the food that is fed to farmed prawns and farmed fish. And again, there's research being done. Particularly, I saw an article about the changing of the food that is fed to the salmon farms, which is obviously a big industry in Scotland. It's where most of the farm salmon comes from, and they're producing it as a byproduct of another industry that grows microorganisms which can then be converted into protein. So they're going to give that a try, and that should perhaps lower farmed fish on the list. Then below that is pork, and then chicken, and then we get on to cheese, obviously still quite high because of it coming from cattle, eggs, and then the tofu, beans, peas and nuts at the bottom there, producing very few greenhouse gases. So it's one of the reasons why people think, oh, you know, if I'm going to do anything for the planet, I've got to become a vegetarian. But that's not necessarily the case, but it might be a reason for choosing meat products less often, and increasing our use of tofu, beans, peas and nuts. And actually in the programme that Anne mentioned, the one with the celebrities having a dinner party, the tofu featured in that, and that was quite an interesting comic, because they had to do a lot of work to make the tofu actually taste of something, because one of the problems with it is it's quite a tasteless product. Okay.
What is it?
What is it?
Soya.
Soya. It's just a curd made from soya. Okay, can we have the next slide, please, Anne? So along with your protein on your plate, you might choose some carbohydrate. And on this slide, you can see that, and probably quite surprisingly, surprised us, that rice doesn't do very well. Pasta, slightly high, well, quite a lot lower, but the pasta obviously has to be processed. It doesn't just go on the plate, it has to be made. And therefore that gets some greenhouse gas production in its manufacture. Oatmeal, and then bread, and last of all, potatoes. The explanation for the rice is that rice grows underwater, and that's not good. That's preseeing a little bit of what the explanation is, but by growing underwater, the microorganisms are actually producing the methane, which is then released into the atmosphere. Is that the right explanation, Anne?
There are there's other organic matter under the water which can't decompose because there's no oxygen there for it. So it's the other, it's not the rice itself, it's whatever else is under the water that is decomposing into methane.
But it's a phenomenal difference.
Yeah.
More than twice of any of the other, what we would class as fairly typical carbohydrates to have with the meal. So I'd always thought that rice was a good choice, but perhaps not. Okay, can we have the next slide, please? So obviously ingredients are put together to make our meals. So if you were going to make a curry, you can see that if you make it with lamb, highest percentage of the CO2 is from the meat itself and all the other bits that you might add to it. And you've got the alternative corn, which is also quite a tasteless product on its own, but can be used for a curry. And it's manufactured to have the texture of meat. So it's not quite as jelly-like as tofu might be. Or you could just go for plant-based chickpeas and make those into your curry with a clearer conscience. Okay, can we have the next slide? Another family favorite, certainly is in our house anyway, but bolognese. If you're using beef mince, again, it's the culprit for producing the most CO2. You could make it with chicken, or you could make it with lentils. And because the other ingredients are strong flavored, sometimes it's quite hard to tell the difference because it's a minced product and therefore it has the same sort of texture as lentils by the time they've been cooked. So again, you could solve some of the problem, or solve some of your conscience by maybe mixing the two. So having some lentils in with the beef or in with the chicken, because I think there's quite a case for changing what we do a bit rather than totally going overboard, and maybe changing the proportions. Certainly that's happened with school dinners, that canteen staff are putting more lentils into products where they can disguise them. And also something else that they've added, this is just an aside, you know, because of girls' need for iron, they've also added liver to bolognese in schools, because the children don't know if it's mixed up with everything else. So you can solve some of the dietary issues by being quite sneaky in complex products like curry or bolognese, and you might get away with it within your family. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to go back into the breakout rooms again, and we're going to think about what influences you most in your main meal choices. Is it your health, animal welfare, carbon footprint, packaging? These are all the extra issues that surround our choices. It's not just your carbon footprint, there's so many other things. Are you considering any different choices? And have you tried any vegetarian or vegan recipes? Okay, so David, can you do your magic and put us back in our groups? Thank you.
And do you want me to start this time?
Yes, Mo, thank you.
Okay. Very quickly it became apparent that what was influencing what we ate per night was what was in the fridge. We didn't want to waste any food, so food waste was quite high on the what we ate list. We also were, all three of us were conscious about the food miles attached to our food. So we're looking up where does it come from, UK, or is it coming from Egypt or South America or whatever. So that has been influencing what goes in the shopping basket. We all three had said we've reduced our meat consumption quite considerably over the years, and Francie and I have both got gardens, so we're able to have vegetables more or less all the year, from broccoli and kale during the winter to potatoes and beans and peas and things during the summer. So just making the most of it, and freezing as well, trying to freeze. We didn't actually talk about that, but trying to avoid back to this food waste issue. Anne and David did comment on the sort of composting values, but a lot of the food waste actually is bones. It's meat, skins. It's not always compostable. Is where I'm going to go with that one. But we have changed our diets quite a lot in recent years.
Thank you. Jack, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I mean, we talked quite a bit about, we want the healthy option, so we want local produced meats and things. So you know where it's come from, and it's not a lot of processed, and you know what's generally what's in it, because a lot of this stuff has other ingredients in, chemicals and things added to the processed foods. What was the other thing? And food miles, and also we mentioned one of the things is time to cook it. If you something a bit more complicated, have you got time to do it?
Elisa?
Yeah, our group were keen on local produce, look for quality and organic foods, and packaging was quite an issue, whether it's better to go to the local butcher or to buy something from the supermarkets. And I did mention the fact that supermarket meat tends to have been put into packaging and gassed to keep it staying fresh and looking fresher. We also then had Chris talking to us a little bit about synthetic meat, which he thinks will be the future, where meat will be produced synthetically in factories and it won't be farmed. So that's some food for thought for all of you as well going forward.
Thank you, Louise.
Barbara is very passionately angry against the intensive farming that there is, and it's important that we know if the meat's cheap, it's probably not had a good life. And we talked about eating locally in the Philip Hoch estate that we have in Selkirk, and we mentioned it'd be good to know more how to support farmers to grow ethically and to grow more vegetables, and how we can eat more seasonally. It'd be good to know how to do that. And we also mentioned a lot of good recipes that we make.
Recipes.
And I comment about the beef and the methane. Can't remember what it was you said, Elisa, but it reminded me that on the Horizon film, they said they were doing research into the genetics of beef cattle.
Yes.
It was a chap it was a German professor from Edinburgh University, and the other, and a couple of other agricultural places, I think, and they were attempting to successfully breed beef cattle that produced less methane, and they could do that genetically. There was some particular type of cattle didn't produce as much methane, and
That's
so they
right.
were,
It was a
they were
different
working
breed.
on that.
Yeah.
A different breed, and that was quite interesting too.
There's also been something on the news about capturing that methane and using it as a fuel.
Oh, yes.
How do you capture it, Lisa?
I don't know. I'm not an expert.
Well, at least if it's burping and not the other end, it'd be slightly less unpleasant, shall we say.
So it's quite interesting though, on that, the Horizon programme, the wee bit of it that I saw when Anne was watching it, the four choices, one of the starters was vegan or vegetarian and vegan, and actually it was the one that had the highest carbon because it had asparagus that had been flown from another part of the world, and then there was a discussion about food miles. Maybe this is getting at the next bit, is it? But not all food miles are the same. Some food miles don't matter and some do.
Yes, that is the next bit. That's a very good lead in to
that wasn't scripted.
So we'll share the screen again.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
And there's just a couple more slides for our shopping basket, I think.
Okay, so we've done one drink at a time and one plate at a time. So this is just one shop at a time, where we're going to just look at some of the other ingredients that we buy. So can we have the first slide, please? Okay, so fruit and vegetables. This is really bearing out what David has just said. The greenhouse gases are a lot to do with how the food arrives with us. And if it is flown here because it's got a short shelf life, or is they can't retard its ripening, then it's going to be a lot higher up on the list. So avocados obviously are there, tomatoes, berries and grapes, but bananas that can arrive very slowly in containers are much further down the list. Citrus fruit are the same; they ripen on the journey rather than over a short time in the air. And apples is quite an interesting one, because obviously we get apples locally, and there's a balance to be struck with importing apples and those air miles causing the greenhouse gases, or do we keep our apples in refrigerated warehouses so that we have them from the UK but out of season, and that produces greenhouse gases as well. So there's a balance to be struck there, and you need to learn when foods are local and in season, and that's something that certainly younger people don't know. They don't know, and particularly if they have been brought up in towns and they don't see things growing, then they have no idea when it would be the right time of year to pick an apple, or whether it's, they just look at the label and say, oh, it's from the UK, so it must be all right. So there's a little bit of education for the population at large. I say this as a teacher of food technology. That, ignorance of where our food comes from is a big problem, big problem, and I think we can help a little bit by just talking about it.
Yes.
People and saying, this is in season now, look, it's on the tree, not what's in the bag in the supermarket. Okay, can we have the next slide, please? Okay, so this is just showing a little bit about the difference in the way the food travels to us. So European oranges, not a problem. Caribbean bananas, not a problem because they come in containers. Just as an aside, my brother and mother, both my brothers and my brother came back from the West Indies when my brother was a baby on a banana boat. Very well, but they came very slowly, and they still do. They still do. If you keep the temperature low at the right point in the life of a banana, then it doesn't ripen until it arrives here. And then we have strawberries, and added onto there, thank goodness for Scottish strawberries. And I'm sure all of us would say the same. They taste different when they come from local farms. And I went past the pick your own today in the hope that they were beginning to let us in to pick, but not yet. There were no signs up in St Boswell's, which is one of the great places to go. Okay, is there another slide?
Yes, I think Francine has something to add there.
Oh, sorry.
Did you have something you wanted to say, Francine?
You're muted.
We can't hear you.
She's muted.
Okay.
There we are.
That's it.
Oh, can you hear me now? Okay, so no,
Yeah.
it was just to, you probably all know about the farm near Hoyk that produces amazing tomatoes, cherry ones, plummy ones, and bigger ones. And so, you know, at the right, well, for quite a few months over the summer and things, that's a good choice to make for tomatoes. Standhill, yes, yeah.
Sold in Selkirk.
And if I can add into that, they heat their greenhouses by renewable
Excellent.
energy that they create
Yes.
themselves.
Yeah.
A wood chip boiler
Yeah.
burner thing.
Okay, so this is just another slide showing the same sort of things with green beans. I mean, like Mo, I have a garden and a freezer, and make great use of that when things are grown in season. And generally speaking, we can be self-sufficient in vegetables for most of the year, and that gives you a smug feeling. You can achieve that. I don't know if you remember when there was a huge problem with the erupting volcano a few years back, where there was no air freight coming out of Africa, and they were all left with the green beans, and they didn't eat green beans, so they wasted. It was from Kenya, and it's causing a huge problem because we're making countries grow products that they cannot use by insisting on having things out of season ourselves. And that's a huge cultural change that we would need to make, not make the assumption that we can get things all the year round, and allow some countries to grow things that their own population could eat. But that's yet another one of these many issues that you know, we can choose to address in our own choices. Okay, next slide.
Our final breakout room, thank you, Elisa. Are there top 3 tips from your group? I
don't think we'll need 10 minutes, will we?
No, we won't need 10 minutes. No, 5 minutes. I've got a final slide with links. Louise has had to go, so somebody in her group perhaps could take over from her. Top 3 tips from the group. There's a couple of slides left, just as a roundup, I think. So basically, these are all the things that we want to be thinking about when we do our shopping. We haven't mentioned there passing it on, talking about it, which all comes into it as well. And the final slide, second last slide, penultimate slide. Next event, Sunday the 11th of July, we've invited David Coleman down to Selkirk Parish Church to take the service or help with the service, and everybody would be welcome to join in with that or to watch it on the YouTube channel afterwards. we're meeting shortly to feedback what we've done so far and to think of the next couple of months. So if anyone has an idea for a topic, that would be welcomed. And there's links to things that we have talked about, some of the things we haven't talked about, but what I thought I could do was post them out to you in your email.
Very good.
There's a knitting event on, that's the top one. The second one, Sarah Bridle, is the book that I read, and I'd be very happy to share that out with anybody else. Apparently there's a downloadable ebook which is free. I'll put the link on there. Well, she says it's on the book link. It's on the book link. The Good Fish Guide was a suggestion from somebody who wasn't able to be here. The BBC Horizon programme is a good entertaining watch and instructive. There's the BBC Climate Change Food Calculator. And there's something called Twin Your Fridge. You've probably mostly heard of Twin Your Toilet, but you can also twin your fridge. That was from Louise. So I shall send out all these links to you.